Okay, let's say you're willing to buy into the historical account of Adam and Eve's fall into sin by their own free will and the tempting of Satan. Knowing about that certainly doesn't answer the question of how that all affects us, right? I mean, too bad for Adam and his wife, but God certainly cannot blame us for what they did so long ago, can he? This is an important question and is worth looking at in some detail. The first thing we need to understand is the relationship between Adam and ourselves and how his sin affects us as his descendants. It's called original sin. This is because the first sin happened in the garden with the first couple, and also because it is the source of all actual sins of everyone who came after Adam and Eve. The Bible is clear that the sin of Adam affected all people who came after him. And here's a summary of how it works. Adam was not only our representative by virtue of being the fountainhead of all humanity, but also because in a very real sense he was our relational and spiritual representative to God. He was to establish a way of relating to God for all of us. This was to be based on his continual loyalty and obedience to God. Had Adam continued to obey God and love him first and foremost, then we could have looked forward to that same kind of relationship. This, as we know, was not the case. Because of Adam's sin, his morally perfect character and pure fellowship with God was changed. And because of Adam's choice, so is ours. It's like we elected Adam as our representative in the garden and are now stuck with the consequences of his bad decision. Even worse, it's as if we were in the garden there with Adam, in his body and soul, voting against God with him, even though we were not even born. When Adam sinned, we sinned. Because of Adam, his sin is now credited to us as if it were our own. And as a result, we come into this world as sinners. The original sin of Adam is transmitted to every person who has ever lived. However, it's not the same thing as inheriting a genetic trait like green eyes or big feet. We inherit our sinful state from Adam by something called imputation. It's like inheriting a financial debt from your spouse if he or she was to die. Even though you didn't actually rack up the debt, it's now something that is attributed to you, and now you are responsible for it because you have or had an official relationship with him or her. From this imputed sin comes all actual sin that we commit. Now, the last thing to say here is that sin is not a material stuff. It's not matter that resides in the body like the liver or the kidney. Sin is a moral problem that affects every part of who we are. Years ago, I worked as a custodian at a large church in Hollywood, California. This church had beautiful brass handrails that lined the stairways leading into the sanctuary. These brass handrails would be polished every Saturday so they would look bright and shiny for the church services on Sunday. But by Monday, they would already have started to tarnish, and by the end of the week, they were looking pretty dull and streaked and pretty unsightly. Sin in the human personality is much the same. No matter how we try to clean ourselves up, the problem of sin keeps creeping in and tarnishes who we were meant to be as people made in God's image. From the Bible's perspective, sin is basically a contamination of something once good and pure, namely human nature before the fall. From a technical sense, it is a transgression of God's law. Transgression is a fancy word which means moving beyond a prescribed area, much like going four-wheeling in a Jeep on a forest trail that doesn't allow vehicles. You're going somewhere where you were never intended nor allowed to go. You see, the saying, "to err is human," is quite misleading. The statement suggests that there was something wrong with human nature from the get-go. From a biblical perspective, it should be to err is human sinfulness. Now, sin affects us in two distinct ways. One, sin defines us as humans. Sinfulness is now our condition before God. And two, sin is the evil things we do by our sinful nature. It is the things we think and say and do because of our sinful condition. Now, like most problems in life, the original sin of Adam brings with it other excess baggage for you and me. These pieces of baggage are guilt and corruption. And as much as we would like to deny it, we are born guilty before God. We are born full of disobedience and rebellion right out of the gate, even before we had a chance to do anything sinful. Being guilty is an objective reality. It describes someone who has been judged by the standards of the law and are found to be at variance with it. Having been found guilty of breaking God's law in Adam, we are deserving of God's judgment and the punishment that comes with it. What this means is that we could somehow, if we could somehow live a life that was in all other respects obedient and loyal to God and His commands, we would still be guilty and worthy of God's wrath or punishment because of our connection with Adam. What a bummer, but it's true, and the Bible says so. In Romans it says, therefore, just as through one man sin entered into the world, and death through sin, and thus death spread to all men, because all sinned. Corruption of our nature is the direct result of Adam's fall. Each one of us is made in God's image, just like Adam. But like Adam, this image has been distorted and twisted by sin. Think of a lake, a beautiful, clear, deep blue lake. Now, late at night, someone comes and dumps deadly chemicals into the middle of the lake. In a short time, because of the underwater currents, these chemicals mix and spread throughout the entire body of water. Now what we have is a polluted lake. It remains a lake, but it's now corrupted and impure. This is what happened to human nature. You've probably heard the term total depravity regarding our fallen human nature. When we hear this, we're inclined to think that it points to people who are really bad and terrible, people who commit murder and rape and terrorism, child molestation, things like that. These are the people who are totally depraved. We think that the totally depraved are the people who are as bad as they can possibly be. But this thinking would be false from a biblical perspective. The biblical way of understanding this is that total depravity simply describes the extent of corruption in the human nature. Sin has affected every aspect of who we are, body and mind and heart. It is pervasive, and it is the very foundation of who we are. So we could say that people are not as bad as they can possibly be, but they are as bad off as they can possibly be. This means that people you would not expect are also totally depraved. The little old lady down the block, your own mother, you and me. The Bible is full of passages that speak of this reality. In 1 Kings chapter 8, there is no one who does not sin. Jeremiah 17, the heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? And Romans 3, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. We are, by fallen human nature, dead towards the things of God. We can do nothing truly good in and of ourselves that God will give us some credit for. We are in the river and we have drowned, floating face down and drifting downstream. Even if a life ring was thrown out to us, we couldn't reach out to grab it, for a dead person cannot move. This is our situation in terms of doing anything on our own steam that is truly God-pleasing. This is the desperate situation I spoke of at the outset.